session is when the church calendar and finance committee squeeze you out. And we're talking about youth music ministry. And here's the description. In their search for relevance, long-standing steeples are pursuing just about anything that promises numerical growth. The driving force behind the frantic attempts to stay current? Fear. Fear of irrelevance, fear of diminishing memberships, fear of shrinking numbers, fear of extinction, fear of, let's see, what's the other one? Fear of something dying on my watch. Now a decade or two down the road of trend chasing, many churches and their staffs have turned around to discover that the younger demographic, to a large extent, has departed anyway, despite our best efforts to stay on the cutting edge. Why is that? At YouthQ, we believe that most churches have thrown away the wrong baggage, tossing suitcases containing real treasure and keeping the handy carry-ons containing commitments which quickly go out of style and leave us malnourished, hungry, and thirsty for the long haul. I worded that sitting isolated in my office one day when these course descriptions were due. And I needed to say what it was that we were going to talk about. And so I'm wondering, to what extent do you feel like, we've talked today about our different views of the church, our different views of student choir ministry, of youth music ministry as a whole. What baggage do you think that we may have thrown out that is of value, that maybe we should have kept? And what have maybe we hung on to that maybe we would have done just as well to have let go? And why it's important for us to think about that, it's not so important that we think about it so that we can get depressed or that we can get, down about a situation, but so that we can look it square in the eye and begin to deal with it. Have we thrown away some important baggage? Have we? It's going to be a real long hour if we don't talk. Because I've got a bunch of follow-up questions, but they can't be done if we don't face those. Have we thrown away important baggage? And the answer could be no. No, we have not. The answer also could be, I don't know, I'm still struggling with it. Or the answer could be, yeah, I think we have, and here's what I mean. Here's what I'm talking about. And when I say we, I'm not talking about necessarily us. I'm talking about maybe the church as a whole, larger.
Well, I think that for me, I think that's why I brought up the story that I told earlier, because I think a part of the reason why I felt so strongly in this church that I am now a part of is that they are willing to look at, they're going to live from God's grace more than we are going to defend our doctrine and denomination and rules and all of that. even though I think in the Methodist Church, they're very conflicted now about that. And that's why I think Adam Hamilton ultimately was one of the leaders in our whole transition, particularly on the subject of sexuality, that was trying to say there could be a one plan for, and therefore each church within the larger denomination would be able to decide its way on a topic like that. But around that weekend, what we did in our church as a whole is we did a service of unity. And we put out the message that no matter what the General Assembly would decide, we were going to do what we believed God was calling us to do. And so in that context right now, because we're trying to rebuild and redefine that youth music ministry there, I'm just thankful that we are erring on that side, because I think it allows us to be a little more both and than either or in our thinking and our discussions regarding that. And, you know, my church had wanted me to come to this conference, and I think that the positive thing even coming out of these sessions with you is that I realized that we haven't solved all our answers yet, but I'm affirmed in the direction that we're going because of that. And I'm thankful that we're not afraid to look issues like that. Whether it's sexuality, whether it's prison ministry. We have a very strong prison ministry within our congregation. And we're working with inmates. You know, and so one of the things that we did last summer was last Christmas was we got it cleared for a group of adults and children to go and sing in the prison for them. And that was the first time that ever happened. When we were sitting there with inmates having tears coming down their eyes, I went, we're rocking it, this is grooved on out.
So I hear you say that you're pleased in your situation with the baggage, with the suitcases that you all have kept, that you have held on to, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm hearing that.
And I think in that context, it's like what you were saying, we're now in a position where we're not trying to define ourselves based on what the past has been.
Okay. All right. So, musically speaking, and all that you have talked about, it has trickle-down implications for music. Are we throwing valuable treasure away and hoarding things that are not as valuable?
I think we've thrown away, I don't know how to really say this, but we've been told that our children won't sit and sing anymore. You know, they can't sit in a straight row or all those things. So we just kind of did away with children's choirs, or not in my context, but in a lot of churches. And by default, youth choir has gone away because well, they're too busy or they don't really. So I think we've let culture kind of tell us what may or may not be true, and we just kind of toss some of that stuff aside, and it grieves me in that. I don't know if that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely.
Yeah, in the greater context too, just with the movement towards small worship teams that are highly, highly skilled, suddenly your other gifted people have no place to serve.
Exactly.
Like I think about my particular church is one of those churches that has had a strong, we'll call it a traditional music program, choir, organ, orchestra, and 7 years ago started a contemporary worship service. What's crazy is I'm administrating the second service, not leading it, and realizing that of 100 people that serve with me on Sunday morning for the traditional service, only about 2 or 3 of them would be gifted enough to be on the team for the second service, just because of the way that it's set up.
And where do you serve?
First Baptist in Plano.
Okay. All
it's kind of like the universities now that are coming back with SAT, diminishing the requirements of SAT scores for college admission. They're realizing that by becoming so exclusive in the testing aspects of applications, that they were losing people like myself. They were losing this larger swath of students that brought diversity. They actually, in an effort to get the intellectual, they lost this other 100 that you're talking about. And so, you know, Duke University, some Ivy League schools have worked, are making efforts at, in their application admissions, to not being so exclusive with the, it has to be above this mark. Well, we can maybe lessen the importance of this, and how's the essay, what are the extracurriculars, what's the GPA like, and other things, which kind of ties a little bit in with that. I
Exactly.
totally agree with that.
What else? Things that we've done a good job of holding on to, or things that we have held on to that we perhaps should have let go, or that we still can let go.
Well, in that way, like musically, I still believe in the power of a choir. You know, that was life-changing for me. So I still believe in the power of that, as opposed to, not that I can't groove it on out with a praise team band, but that's like eating sushi versus fajitas. I mean, you know, they're just two totally different kinds of experiences. You know, and to try to trade one for the other, I also don't think is, I don't know what the return on that would be.
Right.
I think there's an overarching essence of succumbing to what we think the kids want. Culture was mentioned a minute ago. But I'll always think that is a big Achilles heel for trying to be relevant, is the word that's been used, but to these youth. And so when we let that be the tail that wags the dog.
Mark, I hate to call you out here, but I know that you've been a trusted colleague for a lot of years, and I know that you have a very dynamic music ministry going on. You've been there 11 years in Florida. He's at Deer Meadows Baptist in Jacksonville, thank you. I can't want to say Tallahassee, Jacksonville. As this, you know, you didn't have the benefit of maybe some of the background conversations that we had. But what just hits you immediately when you walk in and we say, okay, what have we sort of sold out to in some ways, and what have we pursued that has been a better way? You know, what baggage have we held on to that we should have thrown away, and vice versa?
Well, not being privy to the other conversation today, just walking in, but I was sitting here thinking of the loss of a large segment of teenagers, the loss of an ability to serve the church, to serve Christ through the church, when we do away with youth choirs. And in my own situation right now, the loss bit of that is a legitimate way for kids to be on mission for Christ. It doesn't have to be with a hammer in your hand, but it can be through music. So I'm seeing some of that through my eyes in my own situation right now. But yeah, by going just to the band-driven ministries, we do lose a huge way for a lot of kids to serve, and not just to worship, to serve. them to be a part of something bigger than themselves, really, through choir ministry.
I think that that's one of the things I love about the whole choral idiom and the whole choral practice that we are about, is that really everybody can participate. It's there's no, everybody's important to that dynamic, because it's so much more than just getting the right notes, although that's a huge part of our stewardship, is making the most of our craft and doing it. But the loss of that, and I think, see if I can express this correctly. Remember, we talked about earlier how you can only have the dream that you can envision. We've said that 3 or 4 times now. If you can't envision it, then you can't have it. Only way you're gonna get the dream that you're looking at is if you can envision it within yourself. And I think it's a holy thing. I think it's mysterious, it's holy. But as we look at it, the thing that, and we also talked about how in order to develop a strong student choir, we have to have that fire burning inside of us. And it's not just enough for it to burn inside of us, we have to then market that to the students, because they have no vision of it. You walk up to a kid in the hallway of school and say, hey, come sing in the choir. And it's like, huh, what? Why would I want to do that? We have to paint the picture for them to see it. So the grief that I have, that I deal with, is not just the talented kids who could sing in choir, or the moderately talented kids, maybe who can't be in the praise band, but who could do a good job in the choir. It's not just them that we're losing, but it's also the kid, and especially the kid who had no idea that he could be a part of something like that, or that she could be a part of something like that. Had no clue. And we're missing the opportunity of opening an entirely new world to them. It's the thing I love, love, love about the Youth Q festivals that we do, because Youth Q was the first group, the first ministry that would put forth the resources to put students behind a professional union orchestra. I'd never heard of that anywhere in the country. And what of in 1990. And the response I got was, God, why do you want to waste expensive union musicians on a bunch of kids? You know what? Just let them play with, the church orchestra or volunteers, or why do you want to? And it's for 2 reasons. Number one, the kids stand up a little straighter and sing a little taller when they're in that environment. But I also watch the union musicians and how moved they are by the spirit of that. And it becomes this dual give and take, and there's no sense of superiority towards those students. It's like, orchestras are like churches. They love to see young people involved, And so one of the beauties of, if you bring your kids to a Youth Q festival, you may have 6 kids or 4, and you bring them and you drop them in that mix, and they hear this orchestra music underneath them, and you see them in a place like McCrary Auditorium or Frost, or the National Cathedral or somewhere, and you see the lights come on in their eyes. And you see that happen, and you just go, that's it, right there. You realize that you have made a soundtrack for life for those students. And Billy's dream has become true in that he is creating these memorable events with scripture text, with quality music, with amazing accompaniment, and their soundtrack is being set for the rest of their life. And what I grieve, is the fact that some of those kids will have those opportunities to sing in other places, but then there are a bunch of kids who never knew that they could be a part. The Asperger's kid, And if you have a group of any size, or no size, you've got an Asperger kid or two in your group. There were some kids that you heard sing last night on the spectrum. And so we talked about that. Kids on the spectrum, kids coming from all kinds of backgrounds, kids that are singing their hearts out with great commitment, and we know already that some of them are not heterosexual. And where can we find that space for the compassionate welcoming of Christ to be felt? So are there other places where we need to look at the baggage that we're keeping and the baggage we're throwing out? Any other areas?
When Mark mentioned missions, that triggered me with just the languages that we get to sing when we sing in choirs, the cultural immersion that we get to experience, the diversity of the music we sing. So if we go to Jamaica, we may, and I'm not saying a praise band can't achieve that, but I'm less experienced in that realm. But I think in the choral world, we've heard it in reading sessions, and we know all too well the diversification of culture and musical expression that can happen, either linguistically or be from an African piece to a South American piece. That's an aspect that I didn't think about it. So you said mission, then I went back to going back to my choir mission experiences. I was like, whoa, that's a big part of at least how we do missions. We try to immerse ourselves in the culture where we're going. I'm assuming all of us do. That's kind of lost.
And that's a really good model.
A global
Yeah.
thing that we lose.
Here's something to consider, and Youth Q is not a travel agent, nor will we ever be, but we are into travel. And the reason we're into travel is because we sincerely believe, and we have evidence to prove that now, that travel in itself is education. If you just pick up a group or yourself and just travel, go over there and walk the roads, walk the streets, travel the public transportation, and come back, you have already increased the educational value of the student, if you do nothing else. But oh my gosh, what you can do with it if you decide to really do something special with that travel. And whether it's in Ireland, we had a group of our Q Choral Ambassadors, which is our college group. See, the thing is, kids are always aging out, and some of our alumni are now literally in their late 40s. Some of our alumni have grandchildren at this point. And so we continue to do that kind of programming, but one of the things that we do is for the collegians who have just graduated maybe from high school and are there took a group to Ireland last year, just exactly this time. And, oh my goodness, what an incredible thing of learning and travel. And it was a spiritual thing, highly spiritual and highly engaging. So I encourage you to get out of your spaces, and you will find that to be richly met with good results. I have a theory. The theory is that the most rabid of some of our white supremacist, most strident of some of these folks have never been anywhere. That's a theory of mine. If you really did the homework on them, many of them have never been out of their state. Some of them maybe ever out of their county. So when you spend all your time with people who look just like you, who talk just like you, who go to the same church that you go to, and we get this provincialism that is tight in here, and there's no challenge on that, and you never go to Bosnia and realize the wonderful people who are there. You never go to Italy and discover the amazing people, or Ireland, and understand why Dublin is the friendliest city in the world. And if we never go anywhere, then we cluster up and just start living in fear of everything that's out there. And by going, we break those barriers and those times. So, anything else before we move ahead? Anything else we should be saving that we're not? I wish we could do a better job at balancing. And how many times have we used the word today, balancing? I mean, it's just, in the choral world, it's about balancing sopranos and tenors and basses and getting them to listen. But in the organizational, ministerial world, it's about balance too. I wish that we could get a better balance between caring for the people who are currently in our circle and reaching out to those on the outside. And so many times one style of church is just to basically leave the 100 to go after the one sheep, or it's almost the opposite. You leave the one sheep to go after the 100. And on the other hand, it can become so ingrown. I remember when I started the San Antonio Youth Chorale, when we it was still under the church's auspices, but we had made it known it was a community choir. One of my distant connections in the church said to me at one point, you know, the thing that bothers me about this is you're working with all these kids and a bunch of them are not ours. And I thought, now, where do you start with that? What do you mean not ours? They don't belong to the club, or they're not a member of the homeowners association, or, you know, they have, you know, a different color skin, or, you know, what is that all about? And as ministers, you know, you get your heartstrings tugged because you know that we are responsible for anybody we run into. Those are our neighbors, you know, along the way. So if we could expand our view of who is ours So often it comes down to just, you know, who comes to our church or is a member of our church. I hope that these 3 sessions will give you some food for thought to consider your own vocation, your own dream, and how it stacks up against the place where you currently serve. Do not get discouraged, please. Discouragement is one of the great nemesis of student choir directors. And there are so many different ways that we can get discouraged. And sometimes I get the most discouraged right after a major victory. I mean, that's the Elijah syndrome, isn't it? You know? And you crawl off in the corner and go, you know, I'm the only one. I'm the only one doing this. And hopefully Youth Q can help you with that. We're always there for you if you need to talk or you need to run an idea by. If you have an idea that you think, you know, I think I could make this work, but I just need to run it by somebody who's maybe not in the church or whatever. One of our staff people would love to talk to you. I would love to talk to you and help you with that. Just talk through it and see what that brings. But your showing up today shows me that you have a fire in your bones for students. And we want to do all we can to help you see that fire ignite, even to the point of, if it means stepping outside of the local church to do your student choir work, we'd like to help you with that. Now, we have some time here at the end, and it's by design. And I would be glad to field any questions. I would be glad to talk to you about anything we do, the youth chorale that you heard last night. If you have further questions on that, I'd be glad to talk to you about that. Someone asked me earlier, how was the transition made from this being a church youth choir to being under the Youth Q umbrella? And I'll try to give you a short answer to that, and then see if you have any other questions or comments for each other or for me. The church that I serve is filled with grown-ups. And when I say grown-ups, I mean mature people. Even the teenagers in the church are mature. But there is not a critical mass in our church, although we are surrounded by high schools galore. We're building a new high school about every 6 months in our part of town. They're just going up. San Antonio, the fastest growing city in the country right now, and we're sitting right in the growth plate. And our church does not have the critical mass needed to put together a student choir. That's a whole nother story that we won't get into. But you get the picture. So, I couldn't live with that. There was no expectation on me that I would produce a youth choir. It's not in my job description. There's no requirement that I do that. But I can't do that. I can't not do that. So we opened it up. We got some money, in the budget for it. People were behind it. They were good. And then we hit a finance committee problem where they wanted to oversee to an extent that was just ridiculous. I mean, ridiculous. And it was just a couple of people. Well, rather than fight that, I just determined quietly, and it was a unilateral decision, I just determined quietly that we were just gonna turn that money back to the church that they had given us a couple of years earlier and say, thank you, but no thanks, and if y'all would just take that and use it somewhere else, we'll do this, if you all will allow us to continue to use the church for rehearsals and such. We share the music library, you know, helps us in that way. So the church helps us, the church supports us, but just not in the traditional sense. Legally, we're divorced, okay? And it was fine, it was good. And some of it was a little bit of this attitude too of, you know, well, these people are not ours. And I can tell you specifically the conflict. Specifically, the conflict was, why are we gonna pay for these kids' mission trips who are not members of our church? That was a battle that I just didn't want to fight. And just said, okay, if that's the pervasive thought and thinking, then it was easier for me to schedule a half a dozen or 10 lunches with donors and just raise the money myself rather than get it from the church. So that's what I did. And we've never looked back. It's a most friendly thing. The church is proud of SACY. We sing there several times a year. We do our big fundraising concert there, but we do not mix monies. Okay? On the other hand, there are people who want to get the missions committee involved in supporting SACY. And I have declined that one too, because I see how the missions committee works in the church. And you get people on there with pet projects, and then they slug it out every year. I just don't want to be a pawn in that, you know? So that was the decision that I made. And in making that decision, I have thought to myself, I wonder if there are other directors out there who need a divorce from their church finance committees to do their student choirs. And there have been, and we're looking at that possibility along the way. So what happens lots of times is that there is a lot of lip service to, oh yeah, we definitely, you know, want to support the youth choir. What they're saying is, and I'm projecting in my church situation, they're saying, yes, we want you to fill up the loft for us on Sunday mornings or Sunday evenings with youth choir kids. Now, we're not going to support you in doing that the way it needs to be done, but yes, if you want to do that, that would be great. And, you know, here's this little bit of money that you can use to get that done. Then there's another thing that happens, and the same nice thinking is, yes, we want to support this. And here's you a 30-minute slot on Tuesday night that you can rehearse with your students. And you're getting squeezed out. All is well. We're all saying that we want it to happen, but it ain't happening. You know what I'm saying? Because who was it that said in order to say yes to something, you have to say no to 20 things? And that's kind of the crunch that some of us find ourselves in. There's not a person in our church who would say, oh, I don't think the youth choir is a good idea at all. I think it ought to, we just don't know. There's none of that. But when it comes down to it, the priorities get shoved in one. And folks, I have to hand it to all of our staffs, because this is tough work. I mean, we've just got this limited amount of time, right? And none of us have unlimited budgets that, we can just, and it has to go around. I'm not blaming anybody for any of that. I'm just saying that may be a reality we need to face. And it is a reality that a bunch of people I know of need to face, but they are telling themselves that their churches are behind them. But when push comes to shove, they're really not. And you've got to discern that. And there are some places, I know Wilshire is a place that, because of the nature of who they are, they highly value this in every sense. But some of us have been in churches that have lost their way in that regard. So what I'm saying to you is, be not afraid. And think about dreaming beyond what you've been given. Because if I had not dreamed beyond that, you wouldn't have seen that last night or anything like that. The thing I love about that group is it is a lot of things, but it is a grouping that would have never come together any other way except that youth chorale. There are students in there who would have never met each other without that community choir. It would have never happened under normal circumstances. Okay, so anything else that we need to talk about?
How is it that you have the energy, maybe physical energy and emotional energy, to raise the funds? Because now you're adding that to what you would, pulling it out of underneath the church. Now you're adding on responsibility of funding it. And boy, I'm just sitting there thinking, how are you possibly doing that?
I have a lot of help.
Obviously, yeah, tell me about that. I mean, you got a great staff at UQ and...
Well, for the first thing, Billy, is we've been at this for 30 years.
Right.
Okay, we've been building all of this for 30 years. I haven't been building Stacy for 30 years, but the whole concept of what UQ does, and I can't tell you what that fire in my bones is. I just know it's been there all my life. There's something about that age group that just, I see them as just the most promising thing in the world. And I think there are some other factors there. For instance, the church that I'm in, I hope I haven't demonized them in any way. The reality is they give me incredible time and space to work the Youth Q ministry. It's amazing. They're so unselfish when it comes to that. And so, I'm free to do that. Do have a lot of help. We have some very generous donors, and some are substantial. We don't have enough yet. A part of the reason the newsletter is going out as broadly and the podcast is going out is because we hope that we will find some new donors by people believing in what we do and going, wow, this is something I'd like to support. You know, $20 a month or something, you know? And so we want to do that.
Do you have any kind of endowment yet?
What's that?
Do you have any kind of endowment yet?
Not an
Just-
endowment, no.
Just
but we-
donors?
But we have some substantial donors who have promised to be with us.
How did you, so if at South Main I were to have lunches and ask for giving, that would not go over well. Not that I'm not looking to do that, but South Main's really beholden to that, you know, finance committee
Gotcha.
approval of, and even using the space and
Exactly.
having the concert fundraiser at the church. I
Right.
mean, so on the one hand, you're pesky guy on the finance committee, and in some respect, you're sort of getting from behind a little bit.
Right.
So, you know.
Well, and it's interesting because the guy on the finance committee is no longer there.
Yeah, no, I was about to say.
But what I took that as a sign.
Yeah.
To say, if he's got these issues,
Yeah.
other people are gonna have, I just don't
Yeah.
wanna
Yeah.
fight the running battle. But our
But some
church,
churches wouldn't be able to do even
exactly,
what you're doing.
our church is very entrepreneurial
Yeah.
in that regard. They're
Okay.
very open and very unselfish
Yeah.
in that regard. So you're exactly right. Billy, this is, you know, I think this kind of came to focus here with your question. This is not something I'm happy about at all. My wife left me in 2009, 10 years ago, and I'm divorced. And that was not something I wanted. It was not something I chose. It was something that I had no choice in. But being single all of these years has given me incredible freedom to, you know, pursue the dream and the goal. Like I said, I would have never chosen it, but the reality is that I have poured myself into this over the last decade. When the marriage came apart at exactly the same time that the nest emptied. So my life went from being a family man to a single, you know. And so it's like, okay, now what are we gonna do with the rest of our lives? You know. And so I've poured myself into it. So that's a part of it, Billy. Part of that energy. But I will be 65 on my next birthday. And it takes a lot of energy. And I think it's also being in connection with people who can make things happen in a certain way. And I can look back and see the orchestration of God's plan in the rearview mirror. You know, we can seldom see God's plan, as it were, in the windshield. That's always a thing of faith, right? It's when we look back and we go, oh. And I even said something that I don't really 100% believe. I don't believe God has a plan. Maybe at some time in our lives, God will direct us to certain things, and I believe that happens. But I don't believe that God had a plan for me to be divorced. But I do believe God was able to use the fallout of that and the spoils of that to create something good. So you look back in the rearview mirror and you go, oh my gosh, I see the hand of God weaving through all of this pain and through all of this, you know, stuff. there are ways beyond just, I guess the summary statement here is there are ways beyond just your church program as you know it today to where you can have viable ministry with students. And I don't know the specifics of that, and you don't either, but watch for it and be open for it. And if the church doesn't support you as you need in that regard, I believe that there will be other opportunities and other things can come along to make that happen. It's interesting because the churches that I served were First Baptist San Antonio, First Baptist Shreveport, Trinity Baptist in San Antonio, and now Woodland Baptist. And it's interesting because each church got smaller. You know, I mean, isn't it supposed to be the other way around? I mean, aren't we supposed to? But each church got smaller. And that's kind of what happens to you when you're 25 years old and you end up at a place like First Baptist San Antonio and all of your professional dreams come true at 25. And then I began to realize, wait a minute, maybe I was not dreaming the right things, you know, if all of this comes together that fast. And so I now have been at the smallest church I've served for the longest period of time. That's my longest tenure. And there's immense freedom in that. When I was at First Baptist San Antonio, and I'm not saying this, you know, out of school or whatever, it's been 30 years since I left, okay, so a lot has changed. But they owned me. They owned me. I wasn't gonna do anything that was going to be not First Baptist benefiting directly, including leisure time, you know, or including a day off. I would not have been able to spend a day off doing something in the community or whatever. It's got to be, and it comes from the thought that if it doesn't happen here, it doesn't happen at all. It comes from that sense that God is here. It's got to happen here. And so yeah, I broke out of that. I was there 8 years and hit several walls and broke out of it. Youth Q could have never begun had I stayed there. Never. It did begin at First Baptist Shreveport. Just a little more freedom. But
And how long were you in Shreveport?
Shreveport for 13.
Okay.
Woodland Baptist now for 15.
That's great.
San Antonio First Baptist actually it was 9 at First Baptist San Antonio. Then I came to Trinity Baptist and I spent 30 years there between 2002 and 2005. It's why I look the way I do. It's a good church. It's a good church. They were transitioning from a pastor of 42 years, transitioning from a minister of music of 27 years. And it was tough. I mean, it was like stepping into a Category 4 tornado every day. It really was. Everybody on staff was in counseling. Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy. And it was really kind of nobody's fault. It was just kind of, the way it all worked out. Questions, comments? this whole thing of pursuing your vocation is fascinating work. And I really want to encourage you to keep looking at the horizon, to keep, the grass is not greener on the other side of the fence, but just stay open to what God might want to do with you and through you. Because I'm telling you, there are students like the ones you heard last night. They're everywhere. And they're so longing and needy for what we can give them. And you're uniquely qualified to reach them. Other questions, comments? Do you want to respond to each other? Anything? We're about straight up 5 o'clock here. Well, let's pray.